Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to share this with you because we're unpacking a concept that completely flips how we view money. For so long, society has kind of beaten it into our heads that building wealth is all about crunching numbers, mastering complex math, or just staring at spreadsheets all day. But what if the secret isn't about reading spreadsheets at all? What if it's actually about reading your own mind? Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever noticed this kind of crazy yet deeply relatable mystery? You've got two people who earn the exact same salary. Heck, maybe they even work at the very same company. Yet one of them lives in this constant, stressful state of survival, while the other just moves through the world with this quiet, unshakable financial ease. Why does that happen? We usually try to explain it away. Actually, scratch that. We comfort ourselves by saying it's just luck, or maybe they were just born with a math brain. But psychology tells us there's something far more profound happening right beneath the surface. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly it contrasts the myth with the reality. The common myth tells us that financial success is strictly reserved for the mathematically gifted or the insanely lucky. But the reality? Financial intelligence is almost entirely about mastering hidden cognitive patterns and psychological scripts. It's really about self-regulation. So while most folks are completely exhausted from chasing the next paycheck, those with a high financial IQ are quietly mastering the mental habits that dictate whether you're driven towards scarcity or pulled towards stability. So here is the mental blueprint we're going to follow today to transition from that survival state over to financial ease. We'll cover 1, reacting versus reflecting, 2, the validation trap, 3, locus of control, 4, identity alignment, and 5, emotional regulation. All right, let's kick things off with our first major shift, reacting versus reflecting, and the sheer power of the cognitive pause. Most people, usually without even realizing it, live in a constant state of impulsive reaction. Think about the actual literal timeline of a financial decision. When you see a flashy 24-hour sale or a sudden dip in the market, that's the stimulus. Second comes the urge, and that is literally your brain trying to trick you into a quick dopamine hit. But here's exactly where highly intelligent individuals do things differently. Step 3. They deploy a logical override. They pause. They don't just react, they reflect. And to be clear, this isn't about having ironclad willpower. It's about using complex problem solving to logically separate a fleeting want from a genuine need. Every single financial choice you make is essentially a boxing match. Your emotional brain is over in one corner screaming for instant gratification, while your thinking brain is in the other, aiming for deep logic and long-term stability. Financially secure individuals have actively trained the thinking part of their brain to step into the ring and take the lead. They recognize that emotional urge for sure, but they consciously choose to override that primitive system. Which brings us right to shift number 2. Escaping the validation trap, where the world essentially operates like a giant slot machine. We really have to acknowledge that we live in a society where we're constantly conditioned to seek out likes, followers, and external social approval. And because of that, it's incredibly common for people to unconsciously use their money as a tool to literally buy worth in the eyes of everyone else. But trying to buy your self-worth, that leads straight into hedonic adaptation. This is a clinical term for the exhausting cycle where your brain gets entirely used to a new purchase, say a new car or a designer wardrobe, until it completely loses its meaning. Then you're forced to buy something even bigger just to feel that exact same thrill. And this brilliantly illustrates why people with a high financial IQ are practically immune to this trap. Their self-worth comes from within, so they value their privacy and personal goals way more than temporary popularity. Look, when you're caught in that validation trap, a massive amount of your cognitive bandwidth is just totally wasted on worrying about the opinions of others. But the moment you reject that desperate need for external validation, you reclaim all of that energy. You stop needing a screen or a fancy status symbol to tell you that you matter. Rejecting that noise protects your mental focus, ensuring that your money is working quietly for your own future rather than loudly for someone else's opinion. Our third critical shift is the internal locus of control. This is all about how you handle failure. We all know someone who suffers from cognitive rigidity, right? People who constantly blame the economic system, their totally demanding boss, or just plain bad luck for every single financial mistake they make. But notice the stark contrast in how failure gets processed here. Blaming the system leaves you completely powerless. A high financial IQ, though, responds differently. They treat mistakes purely as data. A financially intelligent person knows perfectly well they cannot control the global economy, but they also know they absolutely can control their response to it. They take full, unapologetic responsibility for their financial state. When a mistake happens, they don't get offended or defensive, they just extract the lesson and adjust. Now, taking that kind of responsibility requires avoiding a major psychological trap called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a known cognitive bias where individuals are extremely overconfident without actually understanding the subject matter at hand. Financially intelligent people actively avoid this trap through a relentless practice of intellectual humility. They're constantly asking why and how. Instead of pretending to know the whole shebang, they readily admit what they don't know, and that keeps them perpetually learning and hunting for the actual logic behind financial trends. That leads us to point number 4, rewriting your money identity. Make no mistake, this is the deepest psychological barrier you will face. You see, your brain is, above all else, a powerful survival tool. And it's basically hardwired to fiercely resist any action that doesn't match the way you inherently see yourself. Consider this profound truth for a second. If you secretly believe people like me don't get rich, your mind will subconsciously sabotage your efforts. That is incredibly powerful. If you hold a deep-seated belief that money is the root of all your stress, your nervous system will actually trigger accidental overspending. It'll cause you to miss big opportunities just to drag your reality back in line with that old, comfortable, struggling identity. Let's move to and see how this builds a completely necessary framework for deprogramming those old survival patterns. The old identity, the consumer, views saving money as a really painful sacrifice. But the new, aligned identity, the creator, views saving as a fundamental act of self-respect. People with a high financial IQ have aligned their identity with growth. Because they truly see themselves as creators, their brain no longer fights their progress. It actually starts actively supporting it. Finally, we arrive at our 5th mental shift, mastering emotional regulation and creating a clean mental space. Let's face it, it's an unavoidable fact that money is one of the most emotionally charged subjects in human existence. It stirs up incredibly intense feelings. And to understand why money is so deeply emotional, we just have to look at what it psychologically represents for us at a primal level. Safety, power, and freedom. These are core human needs. When our finances take a hit and those fundamental needs feel threatened, our natural instinct is to react impulsively. We get incredibly angry, we fall into a deep depression, or we just completely shut down and go quiet. Think about this metaphor for a moment. A regulated mind is like a clean house. It reduces hidden tension and clears away the clutter so you can actually see opportunities that others completely miss because they're blinded by fear. It's perfectly normal to feel the stress of a financial loss. The key, though, is that you consciously choose your response to that stress, instead of letting the panic forcefully dictate your very next move. Take a second to map out the journey of financial intelligence. In the past, you might have been operating on old childhood survival scripts. Maybe you learned early on that safety was just hard to find. But in the present, right now, you are actively decoding those hidden behaviors. And that means your future is no longer just a distant dream. It becomes a tangible reality where you're actively building your wealth. The absolute beauty of human psychology is that we are not stuck. We are entirely wired for change. So, the crucial point is really captured by this final question. Are you going to remain a passenger to your old, outdated psychological scripts, or are you going to step up and become the creator of your future? Look, financial struggle is rarely about a lack of talent. It's about a lack of awareness. The very moment you begin decoding your own mind, you step into the driver's seat. And I promise you, once you master your mind, managing the money simply becomes the easy part. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to start observing your own cognitive pause today.